Welcome to Deep of Kindness, where real stories touch real hearts. Here you'll find emotional, motivational, and true life stories that inspire hope, compassion, and humanity. Every story reminds us that even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's world. Subscribe and be part of a community that believes in love, empathy, and the power of doing good. Because kindness isn't just a word, it's a way of living. The old neon sign outside Maplewood Diner buzzed faintly against the cool night air, flickering between pink and white. It was past 10, the kind of hour when the world outside slowed down, and only the hum of refrigerators and the quiet scrape of plates broke the silence inside. Sophie wiped the counter for what felt like the 100th time. Tuesday nights were usually dead, especially in late autumn when the roads shimmered with thin fog and the occasional car passed by like a ghost. She'd been working here for nearly 2 years, balancing double shifts to pay rent and save a little for her nursing classes. She liked the quiet. The diner was her little bubble away from the noise of life. That night, though, the quiet felt different. Heavier, almost uneasy. The bell above the door chimed. Sophie turned with her usual practiced smile. "Welcome to Maplewood Diner," she said, tucking her notepad into her apron pocket. A man and a woman walked in. At first glance, they looked like any other couple on a late-night stop. The man was tall, well-dressed in a dark jacket, his hair neatly combed, his expression unreadable. The woman was petite, wearing a pale blue sweater and jeans. Something about her posture struck Sophie instantly. Too stiff, too controlled. "Table for two?" Sophie asked. "Yes," the man replied smoothly. His voice was low, calm, with an edge that didn't quite fit the friendly tone he was trying to show. He didn't look at Sophie. His eyes were on the woman beside him, as if daring her to speak. They followed her to booth 5, near the window. The woman slid into her seat, eyes downcast. Sophie placed the menus in front of them and gave her usual line. "I'll be right back to take your order." As Sophie turned away, she caught it, just for a split second. The woman's hand trembled when she reached for the glass of water. Sophie tried to brush it off. She'd seen plenty of awkward dates, tired couples, travelers with stories written in their silence. But something about this pair made her skin prickle. From behind the counter, she stole quick glances. The man sat upright, speaking in a controlled, low tone. The woman nodded to everything he said, her face pale, movements mechanical. She never once looked up. Sophie frowned. Her gut told her something was off. When she went back to take their order, she smiled softly, hoping to lighten the mood. "Can I get you folks started with something to drink?" "Coffee," the man said shortly. "Tea," the woman whispered. Her voice was so faint Sophie almost didn't hear it. "Coming right up." Sophie scribbled quickly, then hesitated. "Anything to eat?" The man glanced at the woman before answering. "We'll start with pie." As Sophie walked back to the counter, she noticed in the chrome reflection of the coffee machine, the woman's eyes flicked toward her, filled with something raw. Not sadness, not fear exactly. Desperation. By the time Sophie returned with their drinks, the woman had barely moved. The man smiled politely, that same empty, perfect smile, and thanked her. "Would you like some sugar?" Sophie asked, her voice steady, though her heart was starting to beat faster. "No," he replied before the woman could speak. Sophie nodded and stepped away, pretending to rearrange napkin dispensers on nearby tables. Then she saw it. At first, she thought it was just another crumpled napkin someone had dropped. But as she bent slightly to pick it up from the edge of the table next to theirs, her breath caught. The napkin wasn't random. It was deliberately folded and pushed toward the aisle, like someone had wanted it to be seen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it, trying to appear casual. One word was scribbled in shaky, uneven handwriting. "Help." Sophie's heart jumped into her throat. She froze, her eyes scanning the letters again, making sure she wasn't imagining things. The ink was smudged slightly, as if written in a rush. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Her first instinct was disbelief. Maybe it was a joke, or maybe she misread it. But deep down she knew. The handwriting looked feminine, and she had seen that woman's trembling hands. Her mind raced. Should she call the police? Tell her manager? Approach the woman? Before she could decide, Sophie felt it. A stare. Cold. Direct. She looked up and met the man's eyes. He was watching her. His smile was gone now, replaced by something harder. His gaze locked on her like a warning. Sophie's blood ran cold. She forced a shaky smile, pretended to wipe the table again, and tucked the napkin quickly into her apron pocket. She could feel her pulse thudding against it. "Everything okay, miss?" His voice was suddenly louder, cutting through the quiet diner. Yes, Sophie stammered. "Just cleaning up." He studied her for another second before leaning back, his expression neutral again. "Good," he said. "We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." Sophie turned away, her throat dry. She reached the counter and set down the coffee pot with trembling hands. Her co-worker Lena was in the kitchen prepping desserts, humming softly, completely unaware of what was happening. Sophie tried to think. What if the man followed her home later? What if he realized she'd seen the note? Her phone was in her apron, but she couldn't risk making a call. The diner's security camera barely worked, and the next gas station was miles away. She peeked again at booth 5. The woman's face was turned slightly toward the window, and for just a split second, Sophie saw a tear slip down her cheek. The man said something under his breath, and the woman stiffened, quickly wiping her face. Sophie's chest tightened. The napkin felt like it was burning against her side now, like a silent plea she couldn't ignore. Her instincts screamed at her, do something, but what? If she confronted him, it could make things worse. If she waited too long, the couple might leave before help arrived. Just then, the door opened again. The small bell chimed, and an older man walked in, wearing a gray coat and carrying a newspaper. He sat down quietly at table 12 across the diner, directly facing booth 5. Sophie took a deep breath. Maybe fate had just sent her someone who could help. Her heart still pounding, she glanced toward him, then back at the woman. The woman's eyes met hers for the briefest moment, a silent message passing between them. "Don't give up on me." And as Sophie turned toward the coffee machine again, trying to look calm, one thing became clear. This night was no longer just another shift. Someone's life depended on what she did next. The sound of the ceiling fan filled the diner with a low, steady hum, but to Sophie, it felt deafening. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling as she wiped the counter, pretending to clean the already spotless surface. Inside her apron pocket, the napkin with the word "help" felt heavier than anything she had ever held. She kept glancing toward booth 5, the couple. The woman hadn't touched her pie. Her tea had gone cold. The man, though, sat there with that same unsettling calmness, his spoon stirring his coffee in slow, deliberate circles. Every now and then, his eyes would flick toward Sophie, as if to remind her that he was watching. She couldn't think straight. Her instincts screamed that something terrible was happening, but she was trapped behind that counter, afraid that one wrong move might make things worse. Then her gaze shifted, just slightly, to table 12. The bust. Older man who had walked in earlier sat there with a quiet steadiness that felt different from everyone else. His face was calm, lined with years of experience, and his eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone just reading the newspaper. He looked up once, caught her frightened glance, and nodded almost imperceptibly. Sophie hesitated. Was she imagining it? But then he folded his newspaper halfway down, took a slow sip of coffee, and with a motion so subtle she almost missed it, he beckoned her closer. Heart pounding, Sophie took a deep breath and walked over, clutching the coffee pot as if it were a lifeline. "More coffee, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He looked up, eyes kind but serious. "Not for me," he murmured. Then, leaning in slightly, his voice dropped to a whisper, low enough that only she could hear. "Do exactly what I say." Sophie froze, her mind spun. Who was this man? Did he know something? Her throat went dry. What? She whispered back. He set his coffee cup down carefully and continued in that same calm, commanding tone. "You're scared. he said softly. And I know why. That couple at booth 5, something's not right, is it? Sophie's lips parted, but no sound came out. She couldn't bring herself to nod, but the fear in her eyes was answer enough. The man gave the slightest nod of understanding. Good. You're doing the right thing by staying calm. He glanced past her, toward booth 5, then leaned in closer. Now listen carefully. Don't do anything sudden. Go refill their coffee. Ask if they'd like dessert. Act natural. Sophie's stomach twisted. And then what? I'll take care of the rest, he said. Who are you? She whispered, barely moving her lips. He smiled faintly. Someone who knows what to do. Just trust me. She hesitated, torn between fear and instinct, but something about his tone, steady, confident, anchored her. It was the first moment that night she didn't feel completely alone. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the coffee pot. She took a deep breath. Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it. Good girl, the man murmured. Keep your hands steady. Don't look scared. I'll handle the rest. Sophie turned and began the longest walk of her life, from the counter to booth 5. Her legs felt like lead. Each step echoed louder than it should have on the tiled floor. She forced herself to breathe evenly. Smile, she thought. Just smile. When she reached the table, the woman looked up at her, eyes glassy, cheeks pale. The man didn't even glance up from his cup. Can I top off your coffee? Sophie asked, her voice surprisingly steady. The man nodded, still not looking at her. Sure. She poured slowly, careful not to spill, her hand trembling only slightly. Then, as the older man had told her, she asked, Would you two like some dessert? We've got fresh cherry pie tonight. For a split second, the woman's eyes flicked up, meeting Sophie's. There was a flash of something. Hope, fear, pleading. Before she could speak, the man cut in. No dessert, he said sharply. We're fine. Sophie nodded quickly. All right, I'll bring your check in a minute. She turned away, feeling his gaze burn into her back. Every instinct screamed run, but she forced herself to keep walking, keep breathing. When she reached the counter, her knees nearly gave out. She set the pot down with a soft clink and turned her head slightly toward table 12. The man with the newspaper was already moving. He didn't look at her this time. Didn't need to. With practiced calm, he reached under the table, pulled out his phone, and began typing something quickly. His thumb moved fast, precise, deliberate. Sophie's heart pounded as she realized what he was doing. He was texting the police. She turned, her back to booth 5, pretending to arrange utensils while sneaking a glance toward him. She saw the brief glow of his phone screen as he typed, Possible domestic hostage situation, Maplewood Diner, woman signaling for help. Then he hit send. Sophie's breath caught. Relief flooded her chest, but only for a moment. Because now, all they could do was wait. The clock on the wall ticked louder with every passing second. The man at booth 5 was getting restless, drumming his fingers on the table. The woman didn't move. Excuse me, he called suddenly, making Sophie jump. Can we get the check? Right away, she said, forcing a smile. She scribbled quickly, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the pen. As she slipped the bill onto their table, she prayed silently for the police to arrive in time. The man took the check, his eyes lingering on her just a second too long. You look nervous, he said, his voice low and sharp. Sophie's stomach dropped. Just tired, she replied quickly. He smirked. Long night, huh? Yeah, she managed. When he looked away again, Sophie's eyes darted toward table 12. The older man was still calm, watching, waiting. But now, his phone rested on the edge of the table, his fingers hovering just above the screen, ready. The seconds stretched into an eternity. A faint sound broke the tension, the distant wail of sirens growing louder. Sophie tried not to react, keeping her head down as she wiped the counter again. The man at booth 5 froze mid-sip, his head turning slightly toward the window. His eyes narrowed. "Everything okay out there?" he muttered. Sophie forced a shrug. "Probably just a speeding ticket," she said. Her voice barely held steady. He didn't answer. He was listening, really listening, to the sound getting closer. Then, almost too quietly to notice, the doorbell chimed. 2 police officers stepped inside. They looked casual, almost friendly. One of them chatting about coffee, the other scanning the room. Sophie exhaled softly, relief trembling through her chest. The older man at table 12 folded his newspaper, stood up slowly and caught one officer's eye. No words were needed, just a slight nod toward booth 5, and that was enough. The faint jingle of the diner's bell barely cut through the heavy silence that had settled over the room. To anyone else, the 2 uniformed men who had just walked in looked like late-night customers, tired, chatting quietly as they made their way to an empty booth. But Sophie knew better. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she wiped the counter again, trying not to stare. One of the officers, a tall man with sandy hair and kind eyes, caught her glance for a split second. He gave the smallest nod, a silent assurance. "We're here. Stay calm." At table 12, the older man folded his newspaper neatly and set it aside. He looked entirely at ease, but Sophie noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the way his eyes stayed trained on booth 5. The couple still sat there. The woman's shoulders were stiff, her tea untouched. The man's hand rested possessively on her wrist as he talked, his tone low but forceful. Every now and then he'd glance toward the door, maybe sensing something was wrong, maybe just paranoid by nature. Sophie's breath caught each time he looked her way. She forced herself to keep moving, pretending to refill sugar shakers and wipe menus. When one of the officers raised a hand for service, she nearly jumped. The gesture was calm, too calm, but she knew it was part of the act. "Be right with you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Her heart wouldn't slow down. It felt like the air itself was waiting to shatter. Then it happened, small, almost invisible. The woman at booth 5 lifted her eyes, just once, and looked directly at Sophie. They were red-rimmed, glossy with unshed tears. Sophie saw it clearly now, the silent plea that had been trapped behind fear all night. Something inside her broke. She gave the woman the faintest nod, hoping it would be enough to say, "It's okay. You're safe now." The woman inhaled shakily and stood up. Her chair scraped against the tiled floor, startling everyone. The man beside her shut up instantly, gripping her arm with a force that made her flinch. "Sit down," he hissed, voice dripping with anger. "Sir." The sandy-haired officer's voice cut across the diner, firm and controlled. "We need to have a word with you." The man froze, eyes narrowing. "What is this about?" "Just routine questions," the officer replied evenly. "Would you mind stepping outside with us?" The other officer moved closer, blocking the exit. "I'm not going anywhere," the man snapped. His hand tightened on the woman's arm. She gasped quietly, trying to pull free. The sound was soft but devastating. Sophie's stomach twisted. Before the man could react, the second officer moved in. In one smooth motion, he grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it behind his back, forcing him down against the edge of the booth. The coffee cup shattered on the floor, the crash echoing through the diner. "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" the man shouted, struggling violently. "Stay down, sir!" the officer barked. "You're under arrest for assault and unlawful restraint." The woman stumbled backward, breathing hard, tears spilling freely now. Sophie rushed to her side, steadying her before she could fall. "You're okay," Sophie whispered. "You're safe now." The woman clung to her for a second, just a second, but it was enough. Her whole body trembled, as if she'd been holding her breath for days. Outside, flashing red and blue lights painted the windows in harsh, rhythmic patterns. A patrol car idled at the curb. The officers hauled the man toward the door. His angry shouts faded as they pushed him into the night. Inside, the diner was suddenly still again, eerily still, except for the sound of the woman's quiet sobs. Sophie guided her to a booth, poured her a glass of water with shaking hands. "You're safe," she repeated softly, like a mantra. The woman nodded weakly, staring at the glass but not drinking. "I didn't think anyone would notice," she whispered. "I thought no one would help." "I noticed," Sophie said. "You did the right thing." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The tension drained from the room slowly, replaced by the soft hum of distant sirens and the faint hiss of the coffee machine still brewing. Then the door opened again. 2 paramedics entered, their jackets gleaming under the fluorescent lights. One knelt beside the woman, checking her pulse, murmuring reassurances. "Do you have family nearby?" the medic asked gently. "My sister," the woman said faintly. "In Cedar Falls. We'll help you contact her." Sophie stepped back, letting them work. Her body felt heavy now that the adrenaline had begun to fade. The reality of what had just happened started to sink in, how close it had come to something far worse. When the woman was finally escorted outside, she turned one last time at the door. Her eyes found Sophie's, glistening with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Sophie managed a small, shaky smile. "You're welcome." The door closed behind them. The flashing lights disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the fog. The diner felt emptier than ever. Sophie exhaled, leaning against the counter, her hands still trembling. She turned toward table 12, ready to thank the older man, the one who had guided her through every terrifying moment. But the booth was empty. The newspaper was gone. The coffee cup sat half-finished, steam long vanished. On the table lay a few crumpled bills and a folded note. Her heart thudded as she picked it up. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Always trust your instincts. You saved a life tonight." She stood there for a long time, reading those words over and over. Outside, the street was silent again. The neon sign buzzed faintly, the same way it had hours earlier. But nothing felt the same anymore. Sophie looked around at the empty booths. The overturned cup near booth 5, the small traces of chaos left behind. Then she tucked the note carefully into her apron pocket, right next to the napkin that had started it all. As she turned off the lights and locked the diner door behind her, she glanced once more at the parking lot. For a moment she thought she saw the outline of the older man standing by the streetlight, coat collar up, watching to make sure everything was truly over. But when she blinked, he was gone. Sophie smiled faintly through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. The quiet returned, but it felt different now, warmer somehow. And though the world outside looked exactly as it had before, Sophie knew it wasn't, because somewhere out there, a woman was free again. Because somewhere, a stranger had cared enough to step in. Because tonight, instinct and courage had been stronger than fear. And because sometimes, even in the loneliest hours of the night, kindness still finds its way to the right people.